Our next guest is Lydia Logan. Lydia is the Senior Director of Policy for the Eli and Edith Broad Foundation. Her work has spanned a range of policy issues at the federal level, the national level as distinct from the federal level, state and local as well. A short list of the issues that have occupied her time includes the Elementary Secondary Education Act, the federal education appropriations, the effective use of human capital, school choice, mayoral, have trouble with that word, control of schools, and expanded use of time for learning. Before joining the Broad Foundation just a little over a year ago, Lydia worked to improve the quality of K-12 education while at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. She's here with us today to suggest practices you might consider implementing to boost student achievement. It's my pleasure to introduce Lydia. It's like in our own living room or here or something, Lydia.
Having lunch with a few good friends.
I know. Lydia, I know a fair amount of what you and your colleagues at Broad are focused on, the mission of helping urban districts produce higher achievement and close the achievement gaps, whether defined by income or ethnicity. Uh-oh, page stuck together. Not good. And currently, the Foundation's strategy is focused on investing in leadership, innovation, policy, and building institutional capacity. I thought if you wanted, Lydia, it would help if you took 5 minutes or whatever feels comfortable to you to define the Foundation's work and its overall theory of action.
Sure. Some of you may or may not have heard of us. We've been around now as the Broad Foundation for Education for about 10 years now. Mr. Broad, who's our founder, is the founder of 2 Fortune 500 companies. He was born in Detroit, Michigan, went to public schools, went to a public university, firmly believes that public education is the foundation for people to be able to pursue the American dream. So when he made his fortune, he dedicated over the last decade $450 million of his personal money to public education. So we focus on policy, innovation, leadership, and institutional capacity. In addition to the grants that we do and the policy work that we do through the Broad Foundation, we also have the Broad Center. And the Broad Center has a Superintendents Academy. We did school board training for a while through the center. And we also work on residents and other training people who are placed at the state education level and at the U.S. Department of Education and other education organizations that are working to really improve student achievement in the district level and to create the environment so that those improvements can happen. So
why don't you explain a little bit your theory of change, how that works.
So the theory...
Oh, I didn't even know. I'm keying you right up.
So the theory of change that we have is really to look at, over the 10 years that we've worked with districts and states, we also have had something called the Broad Prize. And the Broad Prize for Urban Education looks at districts that have had dramatic student achievement over a 3-year time period. Now, we don't select those at the Broad Foundation office. We actually have a team of experts and external consultants who look at the student achievement data. They really dig deeply in. There are districts that are I think it's over 30,000 students, and they serve a large, I think it's 50% or 60% of their students are on free and reduced lunch. So it's looking at those districts particularly, and over the past 10 years figuring out what they have done to achieve dramatic student achievement. And so from that, we're now, after 10 years, pulling out these themes and saying, okay, let's talk to districts about what it is that they can do to dramatically improve student achievement. And we really believe that comes down to strong leadership, which is why we're doubling down our investments on leadership, particularly now at the state and national levels, but we had done that for years at the district level, and through the center we continue to do that. And it's looking at empowering teachers to be responsible for their student achievement, getting leaders to support teachers in student learning and support students in making sure that they master the concepts that they need in order to continue to achieve throughout their career as a student. It's effectively and efficiently targeting the resources of the district towards teaching and learning. And the best example of that, our Broad Prize winner last year was Gwinnett County. It's right outside of Atlanta. And the superintendent there, Alvin Wilbanks, has been is I think it's 17 or 18 years now, the longest serving urban superintendent in the country. And he says everyone who works in this district is either a teacher or someone who supports teachers. He's created a culture where teaching and learning are the center of everything that they do.
Now, why don't you explain, because you were over lunch, telling us how you vet the finalists for the Broad Prize. That's very interesting.
Yeah, so once our sort of team of external people, they go through the data, and that will surface a handful of sort of top tier districts, and then ultimately it comes down to, it was 5, this year it'll be 4 finalists. Once the finalists have been announced, a team of experts goes to that district and spends a week there. So we have researchers who do research and evaluation and consulting to districts. We send another superintendent or top tier person from another high performing district who's not a finalist, so they're not trying to game the system. We send a staff person, a journalist, and it's actually 2 researchers, a TBF staff person, a journalist, and another district leader from a high-performing district. And they spend a week in the district really looking at the finances, parent involvement, student achievement, professional development, strategic planning, alignment of the budget with the strategic planning, all of the things that create a high-performing district. And then it goes to a very high-level jury after we've done an extensive week-long review and a finalist is selected. And then once the finalist is selected, we do a big announcement. This year it'll be in Washington, D.C. on September 20th. And the district is awarded with scholarships for the students in that district.
You guys, over the past even short amount of time, have taken to talking about what this looks like on the ground as a continuous improvement strategy.
Absolutely.
Talk about that in concrete terms, what that looks like.
So we think that a big piece of it is, for what we've seen as a theme, is that the high-performing districts really get into this feedback loop of continuous improvement. So they look at their policies, their practices, their procedures, and they are constantly looking at how you refine them, how you direct resources to what's working, how you start to eliminate what isn't working, and you are always going through that process. So I've got examples that we can go through in a little bit of districts that have done that, but it is really the idea that you don't just do the plan and then execute, but you actually evaluate the efficacy of the plan, make improvements, and go back, and that you are doing that at the macro level for your entire district, but also all the way down to the classroom level.
Before we get to some of the examples, in this time of tight resources, isn't it one of those things that districts find hard to staff? This very, putting people on the data and putting people on.
And it takes a while, and it has to become part of the DNA for the district. So it is a shift for a lot of districts. It's a shift in culture to get there, but it's really creating research-based logical strategies to solve the problems, articulating and communicating the mission so everyone in the district knows where you're going and they are on board with it and they understand it. It's again something that Gwinnett has done in a way that I was on the Gwinnett visit last year. I have never seen I've been in a lot of districts around the country. You can knock on the door of someone who lives in the Gwinnett County district and say to them, what do you know about this district? And they'll say, I know everyone here is a teacher or someone who supports a teacher. So that's how pervasive the culture is in Gwinnett about driving the resources to teachers and learning and supporting teachers. It is really
and how did they do that there?
Impressive. Part of it is he's been there for 17 years, right? I mean, we know that most superintendents don't have a 17-year tenure, so they don't have the time to build up that kind of culture. But to the extent that he has picked something very specific that encompasses where he believes the district needs to go, the school board knows it, the parents know it, the students know it, the employees know it, the community knows it, and every chance he gets, he talks about it and everyone on his staff talks about it. And so they act on it because it is really, the mantra of the district. You are either a teacher or someone who supports a teacher.
Do you have examples from there or other districts where this kind of public will building or everybody getting on the same page, what that again looks like concretely?
I think, you heard earlier from Andreas Alonso, and he's done a tremendous job of doing it, going out to the community, talking about where the district needs to go, what's working and what isn't working, talking to parents and community leaders and getting them on board with the changes that need to happen. And I think I'm not, revealing any secrets to say Michelle Rhee is somebody who did that early on in Washington, D.C. and did not continue to do the kind of public will building that she needed in order to make the dramatic changes, and it ended up really backfiring for her. So I think it's important not to underestimate how important it is to get the message out of what you're doing, why you're doing it, the expectations you have for those successes, and then how you continuously improve on that as you go through implementing your strategic plan or whatever the new initiatives and procedures are.
You guys have identified Long Beach Unified as an example of this continuous improvement model. We too have, we agree, and had the superintendent on our program in New York last week. What about Long Beach is?
So Long Beach has a partnership with universities. So there are a few districts that we have identified that do things. There are a lot more districts that do it. I'm just bringing up a few examples, but one of the things that they do is they have a partnership with the local universities. So when the university is training future teachers, they are spending time in the district, in the classrooms, looking at what is actually working, what kinds of things their teachers need to know in order to be a successful teacher, in order to not have a long ramp-up time, not to reduce that 2 to 3 year period when teachers really sort of get their sea legs and are able to get going. And then they also have district staff going into the university, into the teacher training program saying, it would be much more helpful for us if some of your teachers could do X, Y, and Z. So the teacher training program is continuously improving how they train teachers based on what the district needs. And the district is getting the benefit of the training program participating on their side to see how they can improve what's happening in the classroom. And it's really it's lifted all boats on both sides.
And they see the improvement in student achievement.
They see that improvement, absolutely, in student achievement. And that's the sort of thing that, for you all, if you have a local university, those are the kinds of partnerships that you can implement. They're not terribly expensive, and Long Beach is certainly a place you should look to see how it works well.
The second one on your list here is recruitment, selection, and professional development, the Teach for America model.
Right. So Teach for America has, over the years, refined their recruitment and selection model. What they have done is they follow the core members into the classroom. They look at how the student achievement is of the teachers that they place in the classroom, and they look at how those teachers are doing. Do they have certain characteristics or qualities or ways that they present information? They take those qualities, put them back into the selection process for the following year, and then they select a larger percentage of people who actually have those qualities, so they have a more and more efficacy in the selection process, so when they're placing people, they are more successful. And over time, they've been able to see the impact of their teachers really improve from where they were 10 years ago.
And impact, again, as measured by?
As measured by student achievement, student learning. Over and over and over again, are all of these things connecting to students actually learning what they need to know in the classroom?
Let's move on to the fourth one on the list. It's interesting what Socorro has done on the interventions and the use of the continuous improvement model.
So Socorro has
which is Texas, right?
Yes.
Right.
They have looked across their teachers to see which teachers are really doing a great job of getting students to master the lessons that they're teaching. They then take those lessons from the most successful teachers and they put them in a lesson bank. So rather than having all teachers say, this is interesting, I think I've got a new approach to teaching this subject, let me write a new lesson, they're able to do that, but they encourage teachers to use the most successful, proven lessons as a way to cut down on the variance in whether or not students are learning it. It's all about how do we use a tested lesson that's developed and proven and make sure that we have this bank that's constantly improving. If something comes up that's better, that goes into the bank and it's there for all the teachers to use. It helps teachers with intervention. It helps them to better explain the concepts that are going on. And again, for Socorro, has really helped them improve their student achievement.
So the work you guys are doing now comes, and you've been doing for 10 years, budgets have never been tighter than they are now.
Never been tighter.
And so many people are arguing, we've heard some of it already today, that it is also an opportunity, right?
Right.
We, focus on efficiency, focus on productivity for the good of the
Necessity
cause.
is the mother of invention.
That's right. What are you guys finding some of the most important tactics are?
So certainly prioritization, right? I mean, you all are probably pulled in a million different directions because everybody wants their program to be implemented, funded, expanded. But you really can save a lot of your resources or focus them by lining up your budget with your strategic plan. And that sounds like a very basic concept, but you would be surprised at how often that doesn't happen. Ideally, your budget is a financial representation of your strategic plan. It's the numerical representation of what you have put down in words. So if you are looking at your budget and it doesn't line up with your strategic plan, then you should think about whether you're actually whether your plan needs to be adjusted or whether your budget needs to be adjusted, but do you actually need to spend the money that you're spending on some of those things that don't line up? It's also a great way to back up changing the culture, changing direction, implementing big, difficult changes, getting your school board on the same page, getting your parents and teachers and students in the community on the same page, is that consistency. This is the plan. This is where we're going. The budget backs it up. I know that you all have great Project X, but unfortunately, this year in a tight budget, this is where we need to focus. We need to make sure that our students are learning and that we can raise student achievement, and therefore we may delay doing X, Y, and Z or not do it at all. But it also gives you that cover that you need in order to tell people no.
So under operational efficiencies, that's kind of a no-brainer in the abstract, but what are some of the specifics that you guys are identifying where some savings can be made?
So certainly, some of these will work for some people, some of them won't work for other. There are operational efficiencies. You can look at some of your vendor contracts and see whether or not you're actually getting a good rate. Can you renegotiate some of those? Miami-Dade saved millions on their benchmarking transportation and food services and school operations against other large districts. You can look at central office, and sometimes there are things that are duplicative. So is that a place where you can find some reductions that can be made? And tightening up food ordering processes. Are you actually ordering based on your head count from the beginning of the year, but you've had some changes? So are there ways that you can right-size food count? And that's something, and limit purchases on equipment and repairs. Those are things that were done in Boston, where they saved millions of dollars. So there are places that aren't necessarily conventional places to save, but certainly we've seen examples of districts that have been able to make great savings there.
We've done a lot of talking, or a fair amount of talking today about technology, and I think we all can appreciate that there's some opportunities there even as there are difficulties in the fidelity of the implementation. Yeah. But if you were to move on now and talk a little bit about some of the other levers that are available for districts to think differently about impacting student achievement for the better,
Yep.
Whether it be expanded learning time or the notion of data-driven teaching.
Yeah. So expanded learning time, certainly as we have looked not only around the country but around the world, we really have not used our time that wisely. We know that we're asking students to learn a lot more, we're asking teachers to teach a lot more, and we're not giving students the time to absorb it or the teachers the time to teach it. So that's one thing, right? We also know that if we are going to make sure that students have a full curriculum, that expanded learning time is the time when they can do other activities like arts and things that we think are essential, But when budgets are cut and time is cut, those are the things that unfortunately in a lot of places go by the wayside. A lot of our high-performing charter schools are using expanded learning time to do special projects for students where they can do field trips or a deep dive learning into a particular area of a subject. Sometimes those are things that they're doing during the week, but it's often things that they're doing with an extended day, week, or year. Sometimes, you need to look at seat time requirements and other state or district policies that may make it difficult to expand learning time. But if you look nationally or internationally, I think it's worth noting that in America, our school year is approximately 180 days in most districts. In some countries, it's extremely much higher. In Japan, it's an average of 240 days. And what that means is by the time a student reaches their senior year of high school, and you compare a US student to students in other countries, they may have had 1 to 3 fewer years of school than they would have had if they were in a school system in another country. Mm-hmm. Now, it's just food for thought, but when we look at our international rankings, how other countries are reorganizing their education systems to make sure that they're competing globally, time is one of the places that we have not really been serious about looking at how can we do better and how can we make sure our students are prepared to compete globally by the time that they graduate.
Lydia, one of your bullet points is standards and curriculum, which is the idea of mapping backward, right, college readiness, career readiness kinds of agendas. What are you guys seeing at Broad as being particularly important there for districts to focus on?
Well, we have the Common Core coming down the pike, so I think, certainly there's a lot of talk right now about standards, but in the meantime, we have seen districts that are working with their state university systems and looking at what it actually takes for a student to get into the state university system and mapping that to make sure that when you graduate from high school, there isn't this disconnect between what a high school diploma means and what it takes to enter as a freshman into the state university system. And I think those kinds of discussions can certainly happen regardless of what's going on with Common Core and what's happening with your district, but that connection is a very important connection to making sure that students are succeeding, and once they get into post-secondary education, they're succeeding.
Right. And what about...
Those are, I was going to say there a couple of districts. Montgomery County has done back mapping, and Gwinnett did some back mapping, and Gwinnett actually ended up with, when they worked with the university to do their back mapping of the standards, they ended up with higher standards than the state was requiring, which is another reason why their students have done so well in comparison to districts around the state of Georgia.
We had done a fair amount of talking ahead of time, you can tell, and wanted to cover off on very set amount of information. But I don't want you to think I'm just softballing to Lydia. So I am going to ask her, there are folks who are worried about the foundations, Broad, Gates, and some others, having a pretty big footprint in K-12 education. And these guys she is proficient in answering that question, so I'm going to put it to her. I mean, what do you say to the critics of people?
Well, first of all, philanthropy has been trying new things and making major changes in America for centuries, right? If it weren't for the Carnegies, we wouldn't have public libraries. We wouldn't have there are a lot of things that we use today that we don't think about that were first initiated with philanthropy. We think that there's also an opportunity for philanthropy to try things that we think are promising. We focus on things that are research-based, but we need to be able to try things that are new because what we're doing, I think we'd all agree isn't working, and we've got to figure out a way to do it better. It certainly is coming from a place where Mr. Broad, and I spend a lot of time with him, is worried about the future of the country. It's not, how can I go out there and disrupt a lot of things? It's how can we really save the future of America and what can I do as an individual about it?
I've got a couple more questions that I can ask, but I want you guys to be ready to jump up, and we've got people with mics, and again, say who you are and your name and who you're representing here. Do you guys have some innovation ideas that you're exploring right now that you haven't
We
talked about yet?
We had a board meeting over the summer, and actually what was very interesting is, we've got lots of very prominent people from around the country who are on the board, and they are all very interested in what's happening with public education because they see this as what will happen to our government, what happens to our communities, what happens to our economy, and it is all dependent on a successful K-12 public education system and students being prepared to move on to post-secondary education. They're very interested in technology. I mean, this just has been coming up over and over and over, and how do we implement it? What should we be doing about it? While we do support the expansion of successful charter management organizations, we are also realizing that in a large part, high-performing district schools, high-performing charter schools look a lot alike with a few differences around sort of management practices, but you're still talking about a school structure that essentially looks the same. So now we're starting to see examples like this, like Rocket Ship and some of the technology schools and blended learning and hybrid learning and some of the things that you're seeing where the notion of what a classroom is or what public education is it actually a bricks and mortar building or is it something else? How are we making sure that we're reaching students and delivering the skills and knowledge they need? And does that have to look the way that it's looked for the last 100 years? We don't think it necessarily does. We don't have the answer, but we are looking for it, and we are certainly, if we find it, we'll be talking about it and supporting it and studying it and trying to figure out the best way to get it to as many people as possible.
Let me see if we have a question, whether on philanthropy or district capacity, right here.
Hi, I'm Cheryl Gray with Advantia. My question is about scaling up and the fact that so many of your current nominees are past winners. Does that reflect scale up of some of these innovations and the key aspects or attributes of continuously improving districts?
It certainly does. It's that fact that the continuous improvement has become part of the DNA now in those districts. And even though several of them have changed superintendents, the way that they approach improving student achievement has pretty much stayed the same. So I think scaling up the things that they do that are successful is why they keep ending up on the list. And I think, something else to think about when we did the visit to Gwinnett, and we said, how do you avoid having lots of little programs sort of all over the district, and maybe some things are working and maybe some things aren't, and whether or not the district knows. And they said, we actually have new pilots submitted to central administration before we approve them. So they don't have teachers or principals trying something new in their school when the district doesn't know about it, which happens a lot, right? Principals say, I need to get it done, my kids need it now, right? That urgency is a great thing, but Gwinnett actually monitors it, they pilot it, they look to see, A, whether it's successful before they scale it, and then they work it into the budget for the next year, and they identify every place in the district that would need it, and they say if it works here and we need it and it's successful, let's budget for it and budget for it for everyone who needs it. Let's not just have islands of excellence happening randomly that we don't know about.
What do you think it's going to take to share that kind of information more broadly? I think about how many people here represent districts with only one school or 3 schools or 4 schools. So, I mean, some of this scaling up is, it looks
Right.
different in this range of school district sizes.
Well, you're the one with the great platform.
Well, I know.
Yeah, I
I mean,
think-
we think about this knowledge sharing,
Right.
this,
I
and what
think-
role there is for that.
I do think one of the things that is challenging is that, and I don't think this is, I think this is very prevalent in the nonprofit community, not just the education community, but there's very much an idea of, we have all the expertise that we need right here, so let's find the experts in our district here and figure out what they're doing, and we don't do a lot of looking outward to see what other people are doing. And I think certainly with Ed Week and the advent of the internet, there are more ways to learn about things that are happening, but we're not being as deliberate as we could be about finding out what's working and sharing it and really implementing it nationally. I think Some of that also has to do with the fact that, you know, every state has their own standards and assessments and their own, every district has their own curriculum, and you know, we've got a lot of things that are apples to oranges, which make it harder for people to see the translatability and scalability of some of these things. But I don't think, in general, as a nation and as people in the education community, we've done a good enough job of talking about what's working in a very practical way.
In a very specific relationship to the scaling up question, I would say. Yes, sir?
Jeff Holmes, again from Montello School District. I have a personal theory in regard to that. Our district has been, over the past 2 years, one of those that is looking to move from that 19th century agrarian model to the 21st century learning organization. And based on the research that myself and other staff members have done, what we believe is that there's no district-wide model for you to look at. That what you are seeing is everything's at programmatic or at school level. That nationally, you will not find a district that is a wholly K through 12 model or ages 3 to 21. I think that is the greatest stumbling block right now in this nation, is that no district in and of itself has taken on the task of changing from that 19th century model to that 21st century model. Nobody. I have yet to find any data that supports that.
We should talk about that, because I think there are probably, I think there's some districts that have tried to tackle the continuum of readiness to enter, you know, pre-K is what I'm trying to say, then K-12 and the alignment with what follows K-12. So I would push back on that a little bit, but.
And I'd also say that, you know, turning around a district that has been entrenched in the way it does business for, in most cases, generations, is not a light lift.
No, no.
And it takes, right, you all know this. So getting the will that it takes externally as well as internally to make those changes is hard. And frankly, some people choose just not to do it because it's too hard. So they will tackle things in smaller bite-sized pieces and make incremental change because it's possible. It's, you know, it's much, much, much harder to do big organizational change.
Yeah. Question? Matthew, anything from virtual land?
Indeed. We do have a question. Question for Ms. Logan. Does the Broad Foundation support research focused on educational innovation?
We haven't yet, but you know, just because we haven't yet, I don't think that's to say that we wouldn't ever. We do have an internal research and evaluation team that actually researches every single grant that we make. So they look at, if we do a grant that's, you know, going to, we don't do a lot of district grants, but when we do, we look at student achievement. Did that grant actually improve student achievement? If it's a policy grant, did we have a desired outcome in policy? Did we have impact? So we are a very research-driven foundation, and we do look at the background research before we make grants, even if it's not research that we paid for or conducted ourselves. So the fact that we are now much, much more interested in innovative school models, I think we would consider it. I just don't think anyone's come to us and asked us to do it yet.
Question? Right here in the middle of the room. Julie's making her way, sorry.
One of the issues I'm wondering if anybody is studying is whether or not somebody is looking at the impact of our test-driven evaluation system. What it's doing to curriculum, what it's doing to the relationship between students and teachers. We had a major initiative based on a hypothesis in terms of, that relates to equity in terms of highly qualified instructors. What's the effect of limiting the people who teach based on the criteria for highly qualified, and how it may or may not be impacting, excluding some highly capable but who are not highly credentialed to be qualified? Do we look, those are major levers in terms of education, and what impact is it having on schools and the work that you want school districts to do?
We have not gotten specifically into that topic. I know that it's been a hot topic, teacher effectiveness, teacher evaluation, teacher qualifications. I do know that the Gates Foundation right now has undertaken a massive project called Measures of Effective Teaching. They're looking at tens of thousands of teachers across the country to see what works and what doesn't work, and to come up with a new, fair, accurate, and effective way to measure teachers. I think that work should be finished in 10 months. And I think that will shed some light on evaluation systems and what's working, what isn't. I know evaluation systems alone weren't your question, but in terms of testing, not to harp on Gwinnett, but I will say something else about Gwinnett that I think was phenomenal. I think districts can either look at tests as a way to provide data that will enlighten staff and leaders in the district as to where students need additional support, where teachers need additional support. Again, those programs that are working and strategies that are working and what isn't working, how you double down on what is working and get rid of what isn't working. Students in Gwinnett have a data sheet where they know what their test scores are on every section that they are learning. And what's amazing about it is they will show you their sheet and say, I really need to focus on this concept because we took the last assessment and I did not do well here. I did great on this area over here. So they not only give the information to the students, which empowers them to take control of their own learning, they look at it across a classroom and say, did every student in Ms. Jones's class miss that concept, or was it just that student? That tells you whether PD needs to be emphasized for her on that concept. Did another teacher in another section knock it out of the park with their students? And they've got the data to show that, in which case Mrs. Jones can go down the hall and observe the other teacher teaching that same lesson in a way that may help her explain it better. So data and testing and using that to drive student achievement and empower teachers and students in professional development is not a bad thing. It's only a bad thing if it's not used well. Now, we can go on and talk about the quality of our national assessments and state assessments, and there are other things, but I do think it's important to understand that data is information that allows us to make great decisions. If we don't have the information, we're shooting in the dark. And in a best case scenario, we're using those assessments to inform teaching, to improve student learning, to improve practices, to better use resources. It can be used in a way that is very constructive, or it can be used as a way that's just debilitating.
Right, and and I would add, because I get to, because I'm sitting up here and watch it, that there's a fair amount of work going on now on assessments, of course, and the intersection of technology and assessment is interesting to me, because I think adaptive testing will be a huge positive thing that will happen. Absolutely. That will help guide instruction. And so I'm actually optimistic we're on the verge of getting away from the rote drill and kill and move on to something that is still, I'm agreeing with you and your use of the data to inform decision making and better practice, but I'm hopeful that the assessments and the instruments themselves will get better. The Center on Education Policy, by the way, has done some of what you were asking in the first part of your question. If you go online and look at that kind of body of work that the Center on Education Policy has compiled. There was a question over here.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Klein. I'm with New Schools for Chicago, which just is the brand new name of the Renaissance Schools Fund, for those of you who are wondering what it is. My question is that your foundation has done wonderful work in training leaders at the district level and at school level, and now you're great to hear that you're looking above that to state and national level, but affecting the kind of powerful change you're talking about can't just come from the top down. It also needs to come up from the bottom, and I'm wondering what thoughts, ideas, examples you have looking into communities or that bottom-up level as well.
So we, part of it is a question of scale, right? We are a foundation, but we don't have a money tree in the backyard. So we had to make some strategic decisions about where we felt we could have the most impact given the amount of resources that we had to spend. Certainly, there are community initiatives that are making great strides in supporting districts to make these changes. I know from my work at the Chamber that the Renaissance 2010 initiative was great. We highlighted it. We had Mayor Daley there. We had Patricia, we called her P, there. She spoke. She was, the school board was on board, and that was something that was a Chicago-based, Phyllis Lockett, a Chicago-based initiative. And, those kinds of things certainly should be highlighted and tried, and those are examples of cities doing what they need to do in order to make changes. There are 15,000 school districts, and the Broad Foundation certainly can't, we would be spread so thin that it would be like sprinkling birdseed if we tried to get really down into the weeds. And we'd like to think that we can make a few strategic investments that will create significant change. So I'm not sure if that really gets to your
Partly
question?
what you're saying is, and I think we've tried to underscore it in this panel, is the notion of will building and public constituency building and engagement. I would underscore the importance of that in this work, from the top down or from within the system. It's also got to be, I think, involving the community. I made a big deal out of the fact that I came from this area. I was born Oak Park and grew up in Elmhurst, but I really spent the big chunk of my high school, college, and post-college in Kentucky. And you heard from Terry Holliday earlier, and what Kentucky did to move that education system was as much on the back of a public engagement effort. And it gives me shivers talking about it, because that never would have been possible if the statewide Pritchard Committee and other players in the business community, you noted the importance of the chamber there in getting everybody kind of on the same page, so that the measures of performance went from the cellar, 49th and 50th in the country in Kentucky, to now in the mid to upper 20s in student achievement measures, because that state decided it wanted to be producing kids who were ready for college and career. And that was, and it wasn't just a PSA campaign kind of approach. It was real hard work to build that will. We're going to take one more quick question from virtual land.
This is, and just to encourage you all, you can also ask questions through Twitter. So these are great, and they're coming in. To achieve change at scale, at the district level, what can be done to increase the public demand for innovations within the community?
Oh, right up what we were just talking about.
Right.
I think that part of the challenge is that people outside the district don't always know what's happening inside the district. And people are busy, and districts are busy trying to do the business of running schools, and families are busy trying to, pay the bills and do the things that they do. I think that we probably don't have enough knowledge out in the community about what kinds of technology innovations are happening in schools. You hear about a laptop project where every kid gets a laptop, or every kid gets an iPad, or every teacher gets an iPad. And if the options are not explained in a way that communities can start to demand it, it's a little bit hard to get that demand going. But I think certainly as district leaders, there are things that you can do when you are in a public forum, whether it's at a school board meeting or out in the community, interviews with your local papers, to say there are great things that we would love to be able to try. We think it would individualize student learning. It would help us to better direct resources. It would give our students skills that they don't have at this time. It would give them access to information that we don't currently have in our school library, but we could be able to get online courses. So there are a lot of arguments for why technology can accomplish multiple goals, and people need to know that that's something they should want to demand. They should be demanding in order to then make the case that it should happen. But I think it's a little bit of educate the community so they can then demand it so you can get it done.
I do think it's a demand-driven kind of endeavor, isn't it? I'd like you to join me in thanking Lydia for being here today.
Time flew by. Thanks for having me.